Hi everyone, this is Paul Stapley with Light and Sound. I'm here to just give you some help setting up your template with your new instrument. So to get started, we'll just load up Vienna Ensemble. Okay, we'll bring this over here. Okay, and if you don't have Vienna Ensemble, you can just go straight to loading up Cubase. But we'll add an instance and we'll call it Light and Sound Setup. Okay, so we're going to delete this master bus because we're not going to need it. And we'll just minimize that for now and come back to it later. Okay, so we're going to start a new project from scratch and just add on your typical stuff at the beginning. I like to have a lot of stuff up here so that I just have my MIDI tracks at the bottom, so that when I'm writing, I'm not distracted by anything that I don't need to see. But let me just add on a few things here. Okay, now that we've got the basic sort of template set up, you'll see I've got 3 bars of pre-count. Just so that I can have MIDI resets here, and if I need to start a piece early, I can do that. But now we're going to connect everything up. So we're going to add a rack instrument, and if you don't have Vienna Ensemble, you just add Kontakt here instead. But we're going to connect it up to Vienna instead, and we'll just drag this down here because that's where we need it. And we'll keep our VST instruments hidden. And we'll connect it and decouple it, and then that's now connected. So we've got our first MIDI track, but it's sending to Vienna Ensemble, but it's not doing anything because there's nothing here. So we'll add a plugin of Kontakt, and these MIDI here will now go to here because we've got it as MIDI 1. Okay, so we're going to add on all of our instruments. These can be found in the instruments folder of your chamber strings. So what we're going to do is just load them all in. Some people like to use multiple Kontakt instances for their composing, but I generally find the fewer instances you have of Kontakt, the better everything runs. And now that we've got all of that, we're going to add another instance. And in this one, we're going to put our room tone. And we'll just make sure that this is clicked so that it syncs up. And this needs none because it doesn't need to hear anything. So if it doesn't need any MIDI track. So long as it's connected, the moment you press play in your host, which I'm controlling with spacebar here, it's playing the room tone. Okay. Okay, so we'll leave that for now. And now what we're going to do is set up Kontakt to use the internal routing. See, I've already got my default here, but just to make sure everybody knows how to do it, we'll go through it from scratch. So we'll delete all of these. For many of you, this will be very basic stuff, and you can just skim ahead and we'll catch up with you. But okay, so we'll leave that last one that way as well, just be the decker. In fact, we'll call it the decker, and we'll act as if this is just a new one. So we've got there and there. And now to add all the different outputs that you need, you just click Add Channel, and the number of different ones we're going to need, they're all stereo. So what are we going to need? We've got our decker track, so we're going to need sides, rears, XY, bleeds, and then a close mic for the violins. So we're going to need 4 plus 1 for each different instrument. So we'll do 9. And we'll add them in ascending, so that's all good. Okay, and now to do this, you just need to sort of connect each one so that it sort of cascades down. So you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and so on and so on, and then you just call this sides, rears, and so on. But for now, just to save time, we'll step back to this, which is just the default. You don't have to use this setup if you don't want to. I just prefer to mix within my DAW rather than within the instruments themselves. Okay, so now that that's all set up there, we need to actually set the instruments to go around correctly. So we send this to the decker, and this to the sides, to the rears, to the XY, and here we're going to send the close ribbon to the violin 1 because they're not panned. They're just straight down the middle. So we'll pan them in the DAW. Or you can do that within the instrument itself if you want to as well. And then we're just going to do that for every instrument. Okay, so now that we've connected all of that up, we should see the internal routing working correctly. Okay, so it's coming out the decker and sides correctly. Let's just make sure all of the other mics are working. Okay, so that's all good, but it's not sending out into Cubase correctly because right now these other outputs, they're not going anywhere. They just kind of get stuck within Vienna Ensemble. So we're going to fix that by adding inputs. And if you don't use Vienna Ensemble, you're not going to have this problem. This is only something you need to do with Vienna Ensemble, and it's just to allow the internal routing to work correctly. It is one extra step, but the time that you save in the long run, being able to have very complicated templates, it's really worth it. I really recommend doing it, if you have Vienna Ensemble, that is. But okay, so I'm going to add the inputs that I need, and then we're going to send them all out in correct order. So let's just quickly name some of these. So we'll have this as the decker. In fact, let's imagine that we're in a bigger template. We'll have the chamber strings decker. And here we'll just have the room tone. And we'll just call this sides, rears, XY. And next we'll do bleeds, and then we'll add a few more inputs. Drag that down here. And then we have the violin 1, violin 2, viola, cello, and bass. Okay, so now we just sync these up so that this input is going into this Kontakt instrument and into the second output. So if we look at the actual, oh, let's get that back. If we look at the actual the outputs here, this decker links to this, and this sides links to that, and we're going to link all of these up so we get input 3, 4, 5, 6, and so on. So we'll just do that. And that should be linked correctly. Yeah. Alright, so that's all working. So that's actually it for just setting up the instrument here. When you get the instrument, you'll find that everything is already linked to a CC except for the mic controls, because generally speaking, people want to set their own controls there. The split slider is set to CC23, The mute's set to CC2, and the range to CC6. You can obviously change these by just removing and then relearning one, to suit your own template. But okay, so we'll move back into Cubase, and we will create a folder for our chamber strings. And we've got our first, so this is Vienna 1 legato. And the first thing I want to do is just create a quick MIDI reset. So, okay, so I've already got this set up for what I use. I've got my articulation mapping, which we're going to look through next. Modulation, expression, sustain, which for light and sound instruments takes care of releases. So if you want a long release, you hold down the pedal, and if you just want a regular release, you leave it as is. I really do recommend using the pedal a lot though, because it's a dynamic release. If you've only just started playing a note, you'll have a quick release, and it will sort of it will eat into the release sample appropriately based on how long you've been playing. Okay, and then we've got velocity and articulation, and for now we won't add the extra channels. We will look a little bit into that later on in the video, when we start to really look at how the split slider affects things. Okay, so now that we've got that one, when we duplicate this MIDI track, it will now have the same lanes and everything. So we'll just do this as many times as we need to get our full MIDI track. Let's just start naming these, shall we? Okay, now that we've got all our MIDI tracks, we'll just quickly send these to the right different outputs. So this now connects up appropriately with Vienna Ensemble, because it's all going to Vienna Ensemble 1, and then the MIDI track within it. So, you know, if we play, say, the cellos, we'll now see it playing. Okay, so that's all good. But there's one extra step that we need to get the audio outputs, because right now we've only got one. And we're going to need a lot more. Especially in a big template, you'd probably just want to enable them all. In fact, I would recommend doing that in a big template. So we'll also route these, so we've got the first output, second output, third output, and so on and so forth. So we activate everything until 21 and 22 in this case. Which is right there. Okay, so we've got all of these listed here. So we're going to name these so that they match our ones in Vienna Ensemble. Okay, so now that we've got everything matched up, we should, when we start playing our instrument here, start seeing the correct ones lighting up. Let's just test it with a few more. Okay, so that's all good. We'll stick with this sort of setup for now. But right now you could leave it there, and you know, within your mixer window, let me bring this over here so you can see. And also let's just let's turn off MIDI and input. We don't need those, and we don't really need audio tracks. So we'll leave it to that for now. So you could just start mixing with this, and you know, you pan your violins over there or something, and your viola a little bit there, and cellos to the right, and bass a little bit in, or something like that. and it saves you needing to really look at Vienna Ensemble too much, and or even the instruments themselves. You can then just stick to writing your MIDI and your composition, and not really have to focus on anything else. And even your mixing is done within Cubase, which I personally prefer. And this is just giving you one option. But okay, so now that we've got all of that set up, let's start looking at some basic expression map usage. So we'll do this for the first violin articulations patch, and we'll just look at sort of some of the things that you can do. And if you haven't made an expression map before, they're extremely useful. This is unfortunately only Cubase specific, but for you Logic users, I think that they are working on something similar, but don't quote me on that. Okay, so the way these work is you set your desired remote. So this is what when you press this key switch, or program change if you want to do it that way. But I like to keep things for key switches for now. This will be what triggers the sort of command. You can think of it in that way. So if we imagine that we're going to have, when I press C-1, I want it to go to the longs patch. And then in the articulation window, it will say longs now, but currently it won't do anything. This is what actually happens. So within the instrument, it's going to do a note on effect, and it's going to make sure that C-1 is pressed. So within here, it will say, okay, so for when you press C-1, it's going to make sure that C-1 is held. And if you haven't got your key switch offset on, by default, this will make sure that longs is pressed. So we'll just set this one, have a look, and that worked. Okay, and then if we want to just add a few more, let's see, we'll just add some basic ones for now. And this will press C#-1. That should now swap between them, which it's doing correctly. One of the main benefits for doing this is, let's call it line sound, chamber strings, artic, which is helpful. The main reason you want to do that is because if you write any MIDI, so let's just write something very basic. Or something like that. Then you can give them a value. So, for this first chord, we want to use the longs, and for the second one, we want to use the dynamic longs. And now, this then means that, there's no hidden key switch data down here. It will just write, the moment it gets to that note, it's going to play this. And, there's no questions about it. It will do that if Cubase is working correctly anyway. So let's start with that. And then it will swap over and do the dynamic longs. Okay. But let's say we wanted to get a little bit more in depth with this. We'll go back into the expression map and we'll say, right, okay. Instead, we want to have two different types of longs. We want to have, actually we want this to be still be C#-1, but we want this to be, say, harsh longs, and we want this to be soft longs, and we just change this to reflect this. This is just how it appears sort of in the score. It doesn't matter too much about setting it. I usually use it. These are the same thing. So currently what it will do is it'll make sure that these both do the same thing. So they won't change the articulation or anything. They'll keep them on longs and make sure that longs is pressed no matter what. But we're going to add on another set. So we're going to look at our instrument and say, right, okay, so this split slider is linked to CC23. So we're going to add a controller message for CC23. And for the soft longs, we want to set this to the top so that we're only using the lower layers, because we're shifting the middle velocities center point to the far right. So you have more control over the lower in the middle rather than the high in the middle. And then for this one, we're going to add a controller message CC23 instead to 0. So now, if we look here, when we swap between them, it's creating basically a new articulation based on what you want. And you can go a little bit further in depth if you want. You can add as many sort of different add-ons as you want. You could have, you could add on, so okay, when it's soft, we only want it to do concertino as well, so we'll send a MIDI CC2 message as well, and be super, super soft and come from silence, so we use the range. And, you can really kind of create your own patches for this. So that would be the soft. And then if we were to change it to harsh, so even though the mod wheel is still very low and the overall dynamic is still quite quiet, the sound that you're getting from the musicians it's edging towards the louder sort of, there's more pressure on the bow. But let's set this back to default by now. Let's control click on there if you're not too used to it. And we'll get rid of this. In fact, we'll just disable the expression map for now. And let's take a look at using the instrument with some reverb. Because one of the real benefits of recording in such a dry hall, as I'm sure you've noticed by now, is that it's big enough to fit an entire orchestral body. It's Windmill Lane Studios in Dublin. And even though it's quite large, it's so dry that you get the different mic positions with different air absorption and the true distance and the directivity from the different areas in the room, but you don't have sort of an extra long tail from from like the rears mics, for example, which allows you to really shape the room to your heart's desire. I find in a lot of drier libraries you don't have those different mic perspectives. So you can't shape the room quite as much. It's more about using your initial sound and then trying to blend it with different reverbs. Whereas this, you get that sort of extra step of being able to shape your room first, and then put that entire room in another room with a convolution, or you can use an algorithmic reverb just to add on tail. So with that in mind, let's add an effects track. In fact, let's add two effects tracks, and we'll leave it blank for now. They're all stereo, good. And I like to keep these up here as well, just so they're hidden. And we'll call this verb 1 and verb 2. All right, and let's add. You know what? Let's add spaces. I think spaces is an excellent plugin. I know a lot of people on VI Control like it as well. I've sort of experimented with every reverb that I can find with this library, and so far I haven't been sort of upset with it. So whatever you have, I'd be very grateful to hear your feedback on what works for you. But let's take a look at some of the ones that work for me. So the NY String Hall, the True Stereo 3.2. This is one that's worked quite well for me, but I turned down the pre-delay. And, well, I mean, the wet signal doesn't matter too much. That more just affects your send. But I go with something like 10 seems to be an appropriate amount for me. And we'll add Let's add the 480, which is a lovely reverb. Very bright. And we'll just give it a bit of a shape, I think. Let's affect more of it. And we can leave the pre-delay. And in fact, you know, let's just leave it like that. Okay, so now we'll open up the sends. And let's just put everything sent through. Alright, so right now everything is going to go through spaces. So let's take a look at how that's sounding. Okay, so that's sounding quite wet, quite a lot wetter than it was anyway. There you go, getting a bit more of that bite back by bringing down the split slider. The split slider does work with any articulation that has 3 or more for other instruments, dynamic layers. So you know it goes black here. So if we go to like the dynamic longs, it's disabled for that. It won't make any difference. But you know, with tremolo and shorts, longs, everything like that, and even semiquavers, it will stay active. So you can do you can really customize the instrument with just these 2 sliders, and you've pretty much got all the control you'll really need. But anyway, let's go back to the sound. See, for most, maybe in a big composition that would be appropriate, but that's still quite a bit. Let's instead let's bypass all of these. Oops. And let's go with the 480 instead. And we won't add too much of this. Even that's still quite a bit for the 480, I think. Okay. But at this point you might be thinking, okay, well, you know, that's still not sounding wet enough, or it's still not sounding dry enough, and that's where your mic positions come in. The driest mic, or at least the most direct mic, will always be the leader mic, or the bleeds. But the XY, it's just got a lot of 4K in it. It's, you know, kind of very, very harsh, very sort of in your face, especially compared to, like, if you compare the rears, if we sort of A/B them. So let's hear the XY. You know, that's quite a big difference in terms of how close the strings sound. And then if we go to the bleeds, which this has the close mic in it pre-panned. I mean, it has all of the mics open in the room. So you got your cello mics open, your viola mics open, the bass mic open, even the piano mics are open. You know, everything is open that isn't listed here. So you don't have your leader mic, you don't have your close ribbon, XY, rears, size, or deca, but everything else. So it's sort of just the natural bleed that you get, plus the close mic for the section. So for the violin ones, they were recorded in situ, so they were on the left. So most of the signal will come from the left, but because the cellos are also picking up, it's sort of a nice stereo image, but still the signal is more directed towards where they're seated. I think it really adds something to your compositions when you sort of put that mic back in at the end of it. But everyone will have their own preference with this. For the wettest sound, you definitely want to go with the rears. I personally like the deca with the rears set up. That's quite nice. The sides are also known as the outriggers. They're great for picking up strings, but you know, when we get to other instruments, you might not want to favour them too much. Okay, so now that we've looked at just the basic setup and how to get started with your instrument, I thought we'd take a look at one of the projects to see how the sound was gained from one of the demos. Sometimes I find that, especially when looking at a library, you'll maybe hear a demo and not know exactly what went into getting that specific sound, so I thought I'd cover that here. This one was the Web of Lies demo, which is just the chamber strings. This is within my full template. This is just where I write, and sort of the setup that looks, you can see it's just color coordinated, and my articulation map is just set up as a basic thing. I don't use too much. I prefer to control the instrument from within it with the extra control. So for the split slider, I'll use the appropriate CC based on what I personally use and things like that. But let's take a look at first Vienna Ensemble. So you see here, I've got the same setup here. I've got my room tone and my chamber strings set up. And the mic positions that we used for this piece were the close mic, rears, and decker. And this is true of all the instruments. And then that's all sending to Cubase. And here is how it looks. There was no mastering or anything like that after the fact. Everything that you heard was straight out of the DAW. And that was intentional, just so that we can look at how to get that specific sound if that's what you're after. Okay, so for the reverbs, I was using Spaces, the NY String Hall, True Stereo, as we looked at earlier, and then I really like the UAD 140. These are the settings I was using if you wanted to copy them. Just to give it a try if you have the UAD, and if you don't, I recommend it. And then, so everything from there onwards, plus the room tone, is then set up. There's no harp or piano in this, but so they can be ignored. But as you can see, everything else is just running to the strings bus, and on that bus I have just very simple bit of saturation, subtle bit of EQ, not too much, just to kind of glue the strings together. And then for the output, I don't use too much here. I use two compressors. One of them is just hitting it very, very gently. Another one is hitting it really hard, with a full-on ratio, just to kind of clip off anything. The EQ I use just for, there's nothing going on here. I just use it if I'm sort of analysing what's going on, if there's any noises or anything like that, just that I can't quite hear or I might be missing. And then a brick wall limiter just for my own kind of peace of mind, and then the UV22HL. In terms of the Cambridge, it's just a little bit, taken off a little bit at the high end. This is mainly used for the input. You can do this with any plugin. I just happen to like the Cambridge. And then I then put the input, push it into, so if the piece is extremely quiet, this might be even higher. Or if it's really loud, then it might only be adding a dB or so. All this does is push it into the first compressor, just so that it starts hitting it. Or if I want it to be, if it's like a big percussion piece or something, I might want to hit it a lot harder, so I'll push it even more. This isn't an ideal mastering chain or anything like that. It's not meant to be. It's just meant to give you a good idea of how things are starting to shape up. So most of the time I'll be writing like that with it bypassed, and I'll just turn up my monitors instead. Okay, so this is how everything looks within a full template. I know everybody's very picky about their templates. I am with mine as well. But I hope this has helped you at least started to take a look at setting up the instrument, and I hope you have fun with it. I'll see you in the next one.